Hey there, so great to see you and I hope you are well. Welcome to Weir Yard. I'm Jenny Kirk and today I'm going to be guiding you through what I am putting up as my top 10 favourite Bachmann models. Now over the years Bachmann have brought out a whole slew of different models, and it's one of those things in our hobby that I think the headline grabbers are always the newest models. You know, there's been a new release of this model, a new release of this model, and actually there's a lot of back catalogue out there, and no more so than in the Bachmann back catalogue. And you might think that some models getting a bit long in the teeth, but actually there are some things from 20 years or plus ago which still really hold their own, and for whatever reason are still great models to have in your collection. And I do get asked all the time, what are your favourite models? So today I've tried to pick out my top 10 favourite Bachmann models, and do leave a comment down below about what your top 10 might be, and maybe try and have a guess of what I might be putting in there and what is going to be my number one. No fast forwarding and cheating. But today, come with me and let's take a look at that top 10 in association with Train-O-Matic, makers of DCT decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at tramfabrique.co.uk. Additional support comes from...
This is Clark Railworks and this is what we do. You'll know us from Ellis Clark Trains and you'll get the same friendly expertise with us too. We've got a huge range of pre-owned model railways from all your favourite manufacturers, and maybe some you hadn't heard of before. It's the place to come for quality. We don't stock substandard models, and everything we sell is fully tested and photographed by model railway experts. No matter whether you model OO gauge, N, HO or more, we have sought after models from all around the world with new listings added every weekday. Check out what's available now at clarkrailworks.com and don't miss out on your latest logo.
Please like, share and subscribe to this video to be the first to know about new videos as and when they go up. And you can also check out our complete merch store down underneath the video with unique and exclusive designs of t-shirts, hoodies, mugs and more. And you can also head on over to Patreon and help support the channel to keep making these videos that you want to see. But let's get on with this top 10. It's always a fun thing to do actually, and do look back, we have done a few of these top 10s and top 5s before, but today it's the turn of my top 10 choices of Bachmann models. Top 10s are always a great way of looking through your collection and maybe deciding what you might be purchasing for the future. And with the Great Electric Train Show coming up, there's plenty of options to frisk the second hand and add to your collection. And certainly I'd like to try and inspire you perhaps to maybe the top 10 Bachmann locomotives that you should be looking out for second hand. There's an awful lot to choose from, and certainly Bachmann haven't been no slouch over the years, bringing out a great many different locomotives. And for my number 10 slot, I've decided to go for the Gronk, the Class 08 Shunter. Now, I just want to point out that I'm not choosing a favourite livery, although this really quite faded rail blue rendition is one of my favourites. More, I'm saying that the Class 08 Shunter in general, with all of its myriad of livery variations, are my top 10 favourite locomotive. When this model was announced, it was one of the earlier branch line models that Bachmann brought out post 1997, when the first wagons and locomotives started to hit the range, and certainly it was a quantum leap over what we'd had before. They got the outside frames right, which for me is something that is of monumental importance. And if you see a model of a Class 08 with inside frames and a generic chassis, to be honest with you, it really is not something that I would ever consider buying. This particular one is 08507 in its quite sun-faded rail blue and complete with its sun-faded yellow on the ends, was produced as I think the second ever diesel outline exclusive for the Bachmann Collectors Club, and it was one which I was first in the queue to pick up because I really do like Class 08 shunters, and this livery was pretty special for me. It's resplendent in this faded version of rail blue, which is not unlike what a lot of these shunters ended up looking after they'd been left out in the sun or taken one too many trips through the carriage washers. And unfortunately, Bachmann haven't really tried to release any subsequent models in this, and I think it's a shame, because the Class 42s and 43s in particular started to look a bit like this towards the end of their lives in the early 1970s, and I think that those would be a great release for Bachmann to do. The only areas on the Class 08 from Bachmann which they kind of compromised a little bit are these side rods that are quite chunky when you compare them to how slender they should look on the prototype locomotive, but I can understand the need for robustness. It was also the case that the very early releases featured plastic handrails which were very prone to snapping and breaking, so it was nice to see that Bachmann listened to criticism and very quickly replaced these with far more robust metal ones. All in all, the Class 08 is available in so many different livery options, it's kind of hard to choose a favourite, but whatever era you model, from the earliest introduction in the rail black with the small cycling lions and no wasp stripes, right through to Freightliner, EWS and DB Schenker and such like, there is a livery option for you. They've also got slides in the tooling which allows quite a lot of different mixes and matches on the side boxes, and this means that an awful lot of the subtle variations amongst the class can be captured in model form. So there you have it, my number 10 in my top 10 favourite Bachmann locomotives. For my number 9 choice, this might be quite a surprise for a number of people, being that it was one of the original branch line models introduced. It was in the blue ribboned range, and Bachmann were quite proud of these when they first turned up in the 1990s, and in my opinion, rightly so. The N class is perhaps one of the forgotten members of the Bachmann locomotive stable, and for me, it is definitely a locomotive worth another look. As we showed in the video featuring this very example, they can be picked up second hand for £50 and under in immaculate condition in the boxes, and even though a lot of these models are not DCC fitted, they're being incorrectly reported as split chassis by a lot of second-hand retailers, and that means they're going for an incredibly good value price. They're also ridiculously easy to DCC fit, and I've done that with my entire fleet. The different livery options that have been available include the late and early crest BR Black, Southern Railway Monsal Green, such as you see here, Southern Olive Green, and Southeastern and Chatham Railway Grey. There's also been special edition versions for the ones which made it to Ireland's railways, and certainly the N class was one of the most versatile moguls to run on the southern part of the UK's railway system, and they are definitely worth having in your collection. They're a reliable and strong performer, and even though they don't have tender pickups, these could be added quite easily if you really wanted to, but I've never really found this locomotive to need them. It's a secret favourite of mine, born out of it just being a really great aesthetically pleasing design, and the fact that they are incredibly good value for money second hand because of the erroneous listings that I see time after time that list it as split chassis when it firmly is not. There are different versions available both with and without smoke deflectors, and certainly they're well worth adding to your steam fleet. At number 8, we're going to go for quite a big express locomotive, and this is the Bachmann prototype Deltic. They produced this for the National Railway Museum as a special, and such has been its popularity that it has been re-released multiple times with slight livery variations, and has always been a surefire seller, raising an awful lot of funds for the Railway Museum. I've been and seen the real one. It now resides at Shildon, and it's certainly well worth taking a look at, and I have to say that Bachmann very much got this model absolutely correct. with their production Deltic, which had come out a number of years before, I always felt that there was something not quite right with that, and it was one of the more disappointing earlier branch line model releases. With the prototype Deltic, though, there was no cause for concern, and this is definitely a model which was superb from the outset. The detail is great, although looking through the engine room windows we are presented with this big grey bulk, and on occasion some of the wiring does get shown through, which is a little bit of a shame, but given its vintage it comes with a 21-pin interface and a recess to take the speaker if you want to go the sound option, and certainly that is well worth doing, and we got a whole host of recessed fan detail and such like. There's fully detailed cab interiors, and really Bachmann did not pull the punches when it came to getting this livery just right, with its French blue and those speed whiskers and the other accoutrements of this livery. It really does look the piece. They still command quite a high price second-hand, and every time the National Railway Museum announces another run of these models, they sell out really quickly, so be sure to get your skates on. If this is one that you really want to add to your collection, you won't be disappointed, and certainly it's one well worth looking out for as we get into the main show season. For number 7, I've chosen the Robinson 8K, later the LNER and BR Class 04. Now, the O designation for the LNER simply meant a locomotive of the 280 consolidation wheel arrangement, but these locomotives were incredibly long-lasting. They were designed by Robinson for the Great Central Railway and were an incredibly successful heavy freight locomotive. Turning up just before the Great War, they were quickly looked upon as being a great off-the-shelf design to produce as the Rail Operations Division standard heavy freight locomotive, and in a time before reliable road transportation and long before air travel was practical or indeed really happening at all, the railways were king. And an awful lot of these locomotives were built by the ROD for use during the Great War. After that period, a lot of them were sold on, which meant that whilst this was a Great Central Railway design through and through, these ended up being used by the Caledonian Railway, the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway, the London and North Western Railway, and even the Great Western Railway, although quite a few of these were just run into the ground until they needed a heavy overhaul and then just scrapped. The Great Western, apart from the Great Central Railway and later the LNER, were the only ones to persevere with a number of members of the class, although they did Swindonize them, and it has to be said that Bachmann also produced a model of that GWR variant. Overseas, they were sold to a number of different countries after the war, and probably the most famous was the John Brown Mineral Railway in Australia, who purchased a large number of these and in fact were the last operators of these in commercial use. 2 of the locomotives survive in preservation in Australia, and a further 3rd locomotive, the locomotive that started out as Great Central Railway 1185, is the one which is preserved in the National Collection, although quite often it runs in its later BR livery of 63601. This particular model that I'm holding in the Great Central Railway fully lined dark green stroke black is one that was produced for the National Railway Museum and sold out incredibly quickly. I've not seen much mention of it since, but certainly when I saw livery pictures of these pop up on online forum site back in the day, I knew I just had to have this locomotive, and it became pride of my fleet for a very long time, and it certainly is still a firm favourite. I've picked up pretty much all of the BR liveried Class 04s that have been produced by Bachmann, and it's also been produced in Rail Operations Division livery, and the aforementioned Great Western Railway versions, plus the BR versions of those, LNER livery, and also a London and North Western Railway black version has appeared too. There's a few different detail variants which have been produced, most notably that smokebox door and the wheel on these earlier versions and the rod version, and the more normal dart on the later BR ones. For me, it is a stellar performer, and you can still pick these up brand new for under £80 from some retailers who retain stocks of some of the earlier releases. So get yourself to Hereford Model Centre and buy one before they're all gone. They're also available widely second-hand at a really great price, and it's definitely a model you should have in your collection. At number 6, I've picked a steam locomotive that was actually a special commission from Bachmann for Model Rail magazine, and this is the USA dock tanks. These were built by Baldwin in the USA and were certainly a very austere design that was designed to be the US Army Transport Corps' standard shunting locomotive in Europe as part of the retaking of Europe from fascism. This particular example is number 300 in this really quite striking Longmoor Military Railway blue as Frank S. Ross was one of the different special versions that were produced, and also they did some BR liveried, also a quite fetching Monsell green in departmental livery, Keighley and Worth Valley Railway brown with silver smokebox, and of course that US Army Transport Corporation version as well, and an NCB black version I seem to recall as well. It's a really heavy locomotive and has got so much charm going for it, with this Walschaerts style valve gear and this really quite tight 060 chassis. For me, out of all of the liveries produced, it's a toss-up between this and the Mansell green version that was produced in a BR departmental livery, which really does look quite fetching. They do feature just a 6-pin decoder interface, and I suppose that's testament that they've been out around a little while and kind of predate the Next 18 interface that would have been standard had these models been produced a little bit later. But certainly this is a really quite quirky locomotive, and I've got no qualms to put it in at number 6. At number 5, I've picked the Bachmann G2A locomotive. This is an 080 tender loco that was derived from the G2 class that the London and North Western Railway built and ran. An incredibly successful design. It's rugged, it's reliable, and it's fairly simple, but with that Victorian charm. With the very iconic patent London and North Western Railway wheels, and if you're wondering, that flangeless set is prototypically accurate to the full-size one to enable them to traverse tighter curves than would be necessarily possible with a full-flanged 080 wheel arrangement. These could be seen all over the later LMS system, and certainly were great performers right through to the last days of steam on BR. One version is preserved in the National Collection, and this really does have an amazing presence. When it was first released, I can remember thinking nothing of all the announcements, and it wasn't until I got to a model shop, which is unfortunately since gone but was in Darlington, where I first saw the Bachmann production model and immediately fell in love with its pre-grouping style design. Now, if you're wondering why Bachmann have never released this in London and North Western Railway livery, the fireboxes were rebuilt in later LMS period, which means that the model as tooled by Bachmann is only technically suitable for LMS and BR liveried versions, although they did produce it with and without the tender backhead on the cab, so there are a few variants also available. This ready weathered version really does capture that oily, greasy, work-worn charm so well, and these can be picked up second-hand for around £60 and upwards from a number of the second-hand retailers who are pricing them to sell, and you will not be disappointed by this model. It's also one of the first models that Bachmann featured the DCC decoder socket in the tender with tender pickups, and plenty of scope for sound fitting. All in all, it's definitely another great model to consider adding to your collection if you don't already have one or more. At number 4, I've gone back to the diesel shunter stable, and for me, the super detailed branch line model of the Class 03 shunter is something that really does turn my head. Now, it has to be said that replica and mainline, and then later Bachmann picked up the tooling of that model for the Class 03, and they were around from the 1980s in 00 model form. I had quite a few of those, and I'm always a little bit skeptical when a manufacturer brings out a completely revamped version of an old classic. The previous version I always thought was not a bad model, and I balked a little bit at the idea of replacing my locomotive fleet with all new models, which can sometimes be a bit of a risk. But believe me, the Bachmann Class 03 Shunter, like you see here, really did knock it out of the park, and I immediately, upon buying my first one, just gave away all of those previous Bachmann and replica models, and my nephew has been enjoying them ever since. The new model really was sublime, and as you can see here, it was streets ahead of that rather clunky plastic model with the split chassis that it replaced. With a full die-cast running chassis, there's a lot of weight in this model, and one of my favourites is this Network Southeast toothpaste livery that 03179 was the sole member of the class to wear whilst it was employed on the Isle of Wight. That also accounts for this quite interesting tooling variant where the cab roof is slightly lower than any of the other main Class 03 shunters, and this was something that 03179 and 03079 had to be modified to be able to fit through the tunnels at Ryde, and Bachmann rather surprisingly produced this as a special edition model for Model Zone, and I immediately snapped it up. It was also produced as a Collectors Club model as Clive in its later guise where it worked at Hornsey Depot, although I didn't get that WAGN livery, although it did look quite nice and did eventually sell out. This lower roofed version has never reappeared, even though 03079 in rail blue would be an obvious candidate, and it's suspected that this would be a pretty good close approximation to do some of the Bury Port modified Class 03s that worked that railway in South Wales that was built on the bed of an old canal and even kept some of the low humpback bridges, which necessitated the cutting down of a fleet of 03s and then later 08s to be able to work the route. And it is a strange thing for me that they haven't made more use of that tooling. But the Class 03 itself, they've got with and without the air brakes, and also with and without the flower pot chimneys, the other option being the conical witch's hat exhaust. So there's a lot of different detail variants that Bachmann can produce for the Class 03, and they've certainly made the most of it, putting this model out in plain rail green with the late crest, also late crest green in with the wasp stripes, rail blue with tops numbers, and the specials both in Network Southeast and Wagon livery, so I'm putting this in as my number 4. For my number 3 choice, this might come as quite a surprise for some people, but this is the Bachmann H1 and H2 Atlantics. They're quite similar, but they have accurately tooled up for both different versions, and I've been lucky enough to pick up both of the London Brighton and South Coast Railway brown versions, but also I fell in love with this olive green variant, which was available at a bargain price from a number of retailers a little while ago, and we did actually feature a video on it then when I picked it up, because I couldn't believe what great value was out there for a brand new locomotive. Its 442 wheel arrangement was one that Bachmann managed to produce a couple of different variants of at the time. We got the H1, the H2, but also the Great Northern Railway Atlantic using the same wheel arrangement for the National Railway Museum. And they really did hit this design of locomotive out of the park. For me, this looks splendid when running and isn't compromised on haulage capacity by that four-wheeled wheelbase on the main drivers. It has a real charm to it, including that really quite interesting and aesthetically pleasing firebox design, and I'm guessing a lot of you guys thought that this was going to be my number 1 choice, so I'm here to surprise you, but that doesn't mean that you should take anything away from this particular model that Bachmann released. If you see it at the right price, bag it and tag it. It's been made available in a number of different liveries, from the original London, Brighton and South Coast Railway ochre livery through the olive green, also the malachite green, which I absolutely love, and you can see on the N class in the back there, and then into the BR liveries. Look out for Beachy Head as well, because that's a locomotive that was the one that got away for the Bluebell Railway. The real Beachy Head was put aside in full working order in the hope that preservationists could raise the money to buy it. Unfortunately, money was tight in the 1960s, and the Bluebell Railway were unfortunately just unable to raise the money to buy the locomotive, whilst at the same time buying the freehold for the railway. And I have to agree with them that maybe prioritising saving the full length of the railway was more important, even though the loss of Beachy Head and also the Z-class tank locomotive as well at around the same time was sorely felt. So much so that in the late 1990s plans were drawn up to actually make a modern reproduction of Beachy Head herself, and that is now progressing really quite well at the Bluebell Railway, and I look forward to the locomotive running in preservation. So if you see a model of Beachy Head, snap it up, because very soon you'll be able to run behind the original for the first time behind a Brighton Atlantic since the 1960s. And all that goes together to show you just why this is a definite number 3 in my top 10 Bachmann locomotives. And number 2, we return to the stable of diesel locomotives, and this might seem quite a strange choice for some people, given that there has been an updated model from another manufacturer, which really is quite good, and also that Bachmann themselves are working on a complete replacement for this model. But I really do like the Class 25s, and they do 3 different variations: the 25-1, 25-2 and 25-3 subclasses, and for me, I just really like this model. Now, I am aware that there's a few deficiencies on the chassis, and of course this was tooled up in probably around, I think it was around 2001, 2002, so a lot has changed in over 20 years. But this is a model that very much holds its own. Like the Class 08, it was first released with horrible, fragile plastic handrails for the cabs, and these were quickly changed to the much more robust metal ones that you see here. The all-wheel drive, all-wheel pickup with a centrally mounted motor was a great performer, certainly for its day and still now, and a plethora of different liveries have been released, including pretty much all the liveries that the Class 25s ran in throughout their lifespan, including this quite interesting rail green version but with tops number and full yellow ends, which for me is quite an attractive and unusual transition livery, which I do quite like. The chassis itself started out as a very basic 8-pin interface chassis, but then was quickly upgraded to a 21-pin interface, which featured directional lighting, and it is quite easy to upgrade one of these 25s to feature independent cab lighting, and sound options were also provided for, which really do sound great if you can get your hands on them. So I do recommend picking up the second-hand Bachmann Class 25s that are out there, because you really won't be disappointed. In terms of performance, these things will take rough track work in their stride and really have a massive hauling power. They're super reliable as well, and are definitely worth picking up, and you see them second-hand at the right price. So when it comes to picking a top 10 list of locomotives from the Bachmann fleet, just what would have been your choices? It's actually quite good fun going through all the locomotives I own, but I'm thinking that a lot of you are pondering what might be my number 1 slot. Maybe a lot of you really did think that that H1 H2 Atlantic would be the one that I would pick. After all, I've said so many great things about it since it was released, and certainly number 39 La France was definitely one of the locomotives that I couldn't stop going on about. You may also have been very surprised to find a Gronk up there at number 10. Surely that should have been much higher placed. And, I gave my reasons, but there's so many great models, sometimes it can be quite hard to decide the order of these 10. I'd love to hear from you in the comments section. What would be your top 10 locomotives? How would you order them? Maybe there's locomotives that just don't feature here at all that you think should be your number one. And of course, with so many to choose from the Class 47, 57, 66, going right through to maybe some of the other steam locomotives. The J72 could be up there for you, or maybe the all-new tooled V2. Or maybe you're thinking, where's the A4? Bachmann produced an A4 and you've got plenty of them. And yes, the A4 could have been there as well amongst all the locomotives that I could have chosen. But for me, time and time again, I've been drawn to one particular locomotive that has spent much of the time that I've owned it sat on the turntable in pride of place in my TMD. And that, of course, is a model that was produced by Bachmann as a special commission exclusively for Rails of Sheffield. We were lucky enough to be able to review the final production samples of these before the rest of the production run actually arrived in the UK. And for me, I was so impressed with these that when it came time to give the review samples back, I just rang up Rails and said, right, I'm going to be buying 2 of these 3 samples you've sent over, so you need to name your price and how I give you that money, because I am keeping these. They are so amazing. And to their credit, Rails didn't beat a path to my door with men with big sticks, and they went, okay, we'll we'll let you buy them because it's quite clear you have fallen in love with them. And this Caledonian Railway Blue was definitely one of those models that I fell in love with. The Cali 812 as number 828 in this really amazing Caledonian Railway Blue. And for me, I guess it's more about the livery. If they hadn't have released the Caledonian Railway Blue versions, this might have been just another 060 style locomotive. It's just such an aesthetically pleasing and beautiful locomotive that has been tooled to perfection by Bachmann, and this livery is the clincher for me. So I've put the Cali 812 in my number 1 slot. But like I said before, I would love to hear from you. What are your top 10 choices? And also maybe what are the choices of locomotives you are going to be on the prowl for second hand? There's certainly a lot of shops out there where the stuff is priced to sell, and a big up to everybody at the Arcadia posse, and hello to Tim. Do tell him that I sent you if you're going to frisk his second-hand table. Remember, they're priced to sell. It really does move quick, so miss it, miss out. Also, the Hereford Model Centre is another area where you can buy new old stock at some really quite amazing prices. I'd also like to mention Anoraks Anonymous. They have some really great pricing structures when you see them at exhibitions, and if the scrum that's around their table is anything to go by, they really are popular. Clark Railworks 2 is priced to sell and has a huge range of models, and if you see them at shows, quite often there's a lot of really keenly priced rolling stock and often some really hard to get items, like some of the older special commissions from retailers that just never turn up on eBay. They turn up on that table at a really keen price, so you've got to have sharp elbows to make sure that you get there. And a big up to any other retailer who has some incredibly keen prices. If you know of any, then do share that with your fellow modeler in the comments section down below. But do you agree with me? Have I chosen wisely, or are there some glaring omissions in my top 10? It's over to you, and I hope you really enjoyed today's video of my top 10 Bachmann choices from my collection. Please like, share and subscribe, and also check out our full merch store down below. We've got the t-shirts, hoodies, mugs and more to make your railway room and yourself some fashionable accessories, and I always love to see you at the shows wearing the t-shirts and hoodies, and maybe waft your mug around and you'll get some of the beverage of choice when you see us hanging around. And look forward to gets. Do come and say hello. But until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying take great care of yourself. Happy modelling. Bye for now. Today's video comes in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at tramfabrique.co.uk. Additional support is provided by...
This is Clark Railworks, and this is what we do. You'll know us from Ellis Clark Trains, and you'll get the same friendly expertise with us too. We've got a huge range of pre-owned model railways from all your favourite manufacturers, and maybe some you hadn't heard of before. It's the place to come for quality. We don't stock substandard models, and everything we sell is fully tested and photographed by model railway experts. No matter whether you model OO gauge, N, HO or more, we have sought after models from all around the world with new listings added every weekday. Check out what's available now at clarkrailworks.com and don't miss out on your latest logo.
I'd like to thank everybody over on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to our Patreon heroes. Without you guys over on Patreon, we really wouldn't be able to keep making the video content that you see on this channel. And don't forget that you can also head on over to patreon.com/JenniferKirk and check out the different tiers of rewards. Thank you so much. You are absolute legends.